Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of marble columns, sharpened gladi, and emperors who smiled as the world burned. Welcome to the Roman Empire, a civilization built on conquest, cruelty, and civic pride twisted into spectacle. You've probably heard about togas, legions, and roads that never end. But the real story? It's colder, bloodier, and absolutely unforgiving. Because for all its glory, the Roman world wasn't made for mercy. It was made for domination, for order, and for control. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the ride through history's darkest corridors. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wild seeing the empire stretch across time zones. Now dim the lights. Maybe light a candle like a Roman household god is watching. Because you're about to wake up in the belly of the beast, the city of Rome. The year is 64 AD. And no, you wouldn't survive a day. Why you wouldn't last a day in the Viking Age. Why medieval people slept the best. Constantius Chlorus, and many more tales. Today is not an ordinary morning. It is the 14th year of Emperor Claudius's reign, and if you are still breathing in those foreign lands where the sun is beginning to climb overhead, consider yourself lucky. But remember, surviving in Rome is like walking the streets with a knife in your heart. Danger lurks around every corner, every step is a test, and every breath is a risk. The moment you open your eyes, you are greeted by the silvery light of dawn filtering through the single eye-hole of the basement on the first floor of a narrow insula, a 6-story apartment building with walls made of a mixture of adobe and wood. Drops of moisture dripping from the ceiling beams give you a slight chill as they fall into your hair. The earthen floor is hardened with mud and sand. Your bare feet clench in pain as they grip the surface. Take a deep breath. The mixture of smells that fills your nose carries the scent of mold, human sweat, and the smoke of a wood fire that has been burning for days. These are the smells of waking up in Rome. Not fresh, but the accumulation of past days. Before the sun has fully illuminated the city, the first task is to go to the well. The echoing sounds of buckets in the narrow stone-paved corridor mingle with the sounds of wheels pulling hoses from an old tunnel to draw water. The water flowing from the tap is far from clear. The harsh taste of iron from the nearest tunnel source carries with it mud that has seeped through the swamp. As you bend your knees to fill the bucket, your back hunches. You think, perhaps even this water isn't enough to clean the oil confessions in the emperor's private bath. But you're lucky to have water, because those who can't reach the well die that day. The rumbling in your stomach is the sound of hunger that will not end today. Your second task is to go to a narrow counter for your breakfast, a hot, metallic, Swedish pulse soup. This is a small wooden counter next to the town bakery. In the grand mansions, they have olive oil galettes and white cheese with jam this morning. But here, the only option is a warm soup mixed with cornmeal and a little water. The 2 drops of honey drizzled into it are a sweet deception, because swallowing this bitter soup is a matter of survival, as it contains at least a few calories. A pair of olives lying on the side while drinking pulse is a matter of life and death for you. One olive is a decoration on the banquet table for the nobles in their homes. For you, it is a witness to your struggle for survival. One costs 5 as, says the seller. You remember that you don't have a single as in your pocket. If you buy it, you might get a few crumbs. If you don't, the words, "You must be very rich," will stick in your throat. Olives symbolize your gold, the crowns of empires. Now it's time to go out into the street. When you open the door, the narrow corridor leads to a street paved with 5 or 6 steps. Here, the sidewalks are partly paved with bricks. Most of the bricks are broken, and between the few intact pieces, there are muddy puddles filled with brick dust. On the sidewalks, a vendor has laid fresh olive branches on his stall to protect the plums and figs he has arranged on it, and placed a scale on top. The buyers? Slave traders passing by with cloth sashes smelling of mold on their backs and travel belongings in their hands. When one of them looks at you, you see not mercy in their eyes, but the thought, "Where else can I sell this?" The wheels of the carts have turned the street sidewalks into mud. The gray water flowing in the small channel below gushes out between the stones, splitting the street in two. Muddy ladders hanging on the walls of houses, mold stains on wooden walkways. All of it feeds your fear of getting lost in Rome. And when you turn the corner, you'll probably see a man fighting with his brother. A woman? Poor woman. She's screaming at the top of her lungs from another doorway. "Get this cold water out of me. This is torture. Maybe you've ruined me. Maybe I can't even find a piece of dry bread." You quicken your pace. You don't want to get caught up in the commotion. Indeed, in Rome, the city of ceremonies, religious rituals, market chaos, and imperial solemnity are evident. But this morning, you are not in the presence of Jupiter, the city god, or Mars, the god of war. You are in the shadow of the irregular informers who watch every minute you spend on the street, the accountants who measure your load in the shade, the merchants who push you into begging with the air of generous citizens, and the public toilets that gush out from between the Roman rosestones. And now look beyond the shadow. The Galerius temple rising in waves above the walls is not the emperor's palace, of course, but there are city guards watching the splendor of both from above. Each guard, with a helmet on his head and shining iron armor, sighs for an indefinite moment. No one can touch this body, this man, at this moment. But they immediately add, until he becomes guilty. Finally, you come to a secluded courtyard, opposite the communal water well inside your house. The water gathered in a small pool tells a beautiful tale as it flows through a simple marble filter. Life is water that does not flow backward. One day, you too may be thrown into the well, into this water. But on the morning you first descend into the well, fill it with water and wash your face. This morning may be the last time you remember cleanliness. Now you hear a gurgling sound, the sound of the private toilet. In the simple, rustic storage rooms, the only option is a bucket marked with rice, indicating the location of the spout. Early mornings begin with this, around 6 a.m., and every door opens to reveal a small hole at the bottom, through which the toilet bucket is lowered outside. You shout, "Cave Vespas," an ancient Latin warning meaning, "Beware of the wasps." But no one listens. As the bucket is emptied, the day's first public cleaning boulevard takes place, the flow of human waste spilling into the street. Amidst all this chaos, a few workers wait on the narrow stairs of the insula, preparing for the day's work. Some are arranging tiles, some are sorting the city's fresh fruit, and some are emptying the garbage cart. As you pass by, one of them says, "Are you going to the symbolic ceremony at the Forum too?" You don't answer because you don't want to hear it. Your ceremony today is the ceremony of survival. And finally, from this street where you greeted the day, you take a step toward the Tiber River, amid the pollution, the dry stone gardens, and the faint echoes of the imperial baptizers. In this ordinary Roman morning, the heart of the city still beats. If you're still breathing, perhaps you've resisted. But don't forget, this is only the beginning. The day begins with the first red light appearing on the horizon, and you wake up to fight for survival once again in the narrow streets of Rome. Yesterday's dirty tunic is still clinging to your body. The layers of dirt under your fingernails are as deep as yesterday's wet rainwater, and the air you breathe carries the scent of damp stones clinging to your belly. When you take your first breath of the morning, a single thought crosses your mind. Even if I can't eat a single slice of bread today, I must survive. This morning ritual is the same for everyone in Rome, whether you are rich or poor, slave or free, preparing your body for the city, delaying hunger and thirst a little, gathering strength until the next moment of danger arrives. But this ritual is not a spiritual ceremony idealized by university philosophers or poetry-writing priests. It is a multi-layered journey of survival, reeking of blood, sweat, and entropy, where every step is taken on the fine line between life and death. Before all this, your first reaction when you wake up in the morning is not a deep sigh, but a short groan from your stomach. That pang of hunger in your chest is a natural impulse for Roma, who shares half of his diet with you. Unlike the fresh wheat grown in your village or small fields, the bread you will receive here has first been boiled in the emperor's fountain, then baked in the priest's sacred fires, and finally, what remains for you from the baker's guild is as dry as a shovel. As soon as your hand reaches the bread, you crush a handful of dark, dense grains in your palm. The bread is hard and dry. A few olives left in the corner, or a few figs recently displayed by the seller with a loud "Pars Codian" cry are more valuable than this dry meal, because a single fig is your hope for survival. In the tiny space they call a kitchen, a few chicken legs are visible between the copper pots hanging on the wall. Animal meat is very rare here, because even the bones of the animals sent to the imperial tables by the great slave owners are added to the small cook's stew at the corner. Today, you might want some chicken meat, but by the time it arrives, your nerves are on edge. The free panis plebeius bread is made from a mixture of crushed wheat and unground straw. You tear off crumbs of panis plebeius, and every bite you take is a fraction of the time spent on the body of Rome. But remember the real purpose: to provide energy. Think of it as modern sports gel, but without the powder, smell, or taste, just a dense pile of calories. It resembles the rice porridge left behind in the kitchens of the legions marching across the empire's borders. But instead of rice, first there was corn, then wheat, and finally a plant whose name has been forgotten. Its taste never lingers. By the end of breakfast, the rumbling in your stomach subsides slightly, but this means delaying even the water. Because in Rome, water is not just water. Every drop you draw from the well is a tax, a fee, a coin, and money. The thirst syndrome is even more cruel. Finding the safest water among the city's water networks means experiencing the joy of getting the least amount. In some neighborhoods, there is access to small bathhouse pools in sila houses, brick-walled, with warm water, perhaps with the addition of fresh aromatic plant water. But this privilege does not fall into the hands of the poor. They are forced to drink the black water known as box water, within the confines of 4 walls. And now, holding a small container resembling a porcelain cup in one hand, you sip a few drops of water. That single sip slightly relaxes your stomach and leaves a bitter taste on the edges of your lips. You think, that's all the water I could drink today. Maybe I can stay on my feet. As you put the cup down, the delicate sound of the glass echoes like the melody of Rome clinging to life. The sound bounces off the walls and disappears, and you sink into the streets with the pride of being able to say, I drank water. At this point, your memory plays an involuntary sequence. Last week, a child falling into a well, a woman fainting because she couldn't reach the water well, a man getting into a fight over glass in the morning and being punished with a wooden bucket. In Rome, water is more closely associated with death than with life. The first sip is a kind of atonement, the beginning of a series of tests of endurance at the well. Your stomach is still growling, and you approach a small stall and look at the vendor. Tomatoes don't grow in the city. Perhaps a merchant brought a few from the Mediterranean. Those tomatoes are as valuable as the emperor's gold medals. When the vendor says, "Price for 2 A's," your eyes widen. 2 A's, maybe 3 A's, you say to yourself. But you have no A's in your pocket. Still, you reach for the tomato because your stomach is empty. The vendor smiles and says, "Pay or get lost." You choose to leave, and instead of the tomato, just a tomato, you bite into your bread a little harder with your teeth. The evening scene is darker. The morning rituals never stay with you throughout the day. But the only thing that made you reach for that tomato wasn't the call of hunger, but the spark of hope. Because maybe when you go to the next post office, you'll be able to taste a few fruits. Maybe. And in the midst of all this, you're still hungry. It's not even noon yet. The world is full of stories about Emperor Claudius's generosity, but your story is just a struggle to eat. The first challenge in the heart of Rome is to fill your stomach. If you can't do this by the end of the day, and most people can't, you'd want a slice of bread before your last breath, even if you have no chance of going to work, to the fields, or to the ships where slaves row. Rome never guarantees this. Your morning rituals are like a cage woven around the pitons of your fate. Bread, water, barking dogs, dirty kitchen doors, streets filled with human filth, all intertwined like a knot, like a well you can only grease. If you can keep the ritual going, maybe you'll live another day. Otherwise, you'll be one of the thousands who won't see another morning in Rome. This is how a real morning begins in Rome. Every breath is a risk, every sip is a tax, every bite is a sign of victory or defeat. You breathe while your stomach is empty, your back bends, and every second you can still stand straight gives you another chance. After waking up in the morning, the second test begins immediately in the narrow streets of Rome. The difficulty of personal hygiene and the struggle for health. In modern terms, the battle for hygiene. Despite all its splendor, the city is like a laboratory of germs and disease. As the sun's rays hit the stones, the dust, mold, and bodily secretions that settle on human skin become even more visible. The accumulated dirt, mud, and sewage sludge smell like a foreign guest in your lungs and stomach as they cling to the stone walls. If you want to survive, you will use this moment, perhaps the cleanest of the morning, when your body first comes into contact with the world, to the very end. First, your hands. You search for a water source near your stomach with the tip of your finger. 2 drops from the jar at home might be the only thing that extends your life. You dip your hand into the muddy water and begin to rub it. At times, you want to drift away as if weightless, but you don't escape. The black strip under your nails is first sand, then dirt, then perhaps a trace of rust. As you pour out the dirty water from the basin, the debris accumulated on your skin begins to dissolve gently. The water flows gently down your itchy elbows, bringing you the greatest relief you have felt in days. But washing your hands doesn't separate you from the rest of your body. You bow your head and take water from a small pot in the corner of the room, splashing it on your forehead, face, and neck. You take a sip of water and bring it to your mouth. This is a bad habit that will cause your teeth to fall out, but you have to drink it, sip by sip, to avoid succumbing to thirst. As you wash your face with water, you try to comb your hair with 2 fingers. The dry mud clumps stuck between your fingers also carry the nightmare of lice and dandruff. The tiny insects crawling around your scalp escape into your eyelids, causing your eyes to water and blur. I wish this water would stop so I could change my clothes, you moan inwardly. The only tunic you have to wear is from the day before. Every tear and stain reveals the contours of your body like a blood pressure monitor. Even if it's made of the thinnest cotton threads that allow your body to breathe. The dampness makes your clothes feel like hell. You need to change your clothes, but there are no spare tunics. If the guard does a cleanliness check, he'll let you change your tunic in exchange for a few coins. He has money. You don't. So you spend the morning, maybe even the whole day, condemned to wear your dirty tunic, now a filthy reward, clinging to your body, trying to save enough strength to study and stay on your feet. Then there are the teeth. Even before breakfast, the thought whispers in your mind, if only I had some miswak to scrub my teeth. But there is no miswak. The date palm branches left at the temples are collected by the household and sold. You settle for a mixture of powder you buy from the spice merchant on the corner instead of a miswak. You mix the powder with your saliva to form a paste and rub it on your teeth. However, the bitter wood ash added to it erodes the enamel twice as fast. At least my breath is a little fresher, you console yourself. However, the freshness in your breath has no effect on the reality of the situation, because the sharp odor from Azraella's faucet resurfaces whenever you speak. You should think about the parasites that roam all over your body after your clothes, teeth, and hair, lice, fleas, hookworms. Every morning, the child who combs his body with a dry comb sometimes achieves only as much cleanliness as the residue of a large comb that looks like vomit. But you know, once a flea settles on your body, after a few days of starvation, it attacks again the next morning. Every spot you scratch reminds you of the presence of an ant that doesn't belong to your skin. There are no scientific tools, no refreshing steam from a vinegar bath, only the terrifying moment of shock caused by the comb's strike. You want to pull yourself together a bit. Maybe you could go to the public bathhouse in the city center called the Balneum Temperatum. But public bathhouses are expensive. Each visit, each refill of hot water, costs as much as a bridge toll. If you don't have a wealthy friend to stay with, this is a fantasy. While you're dreaming of that, the idea of rubbing ointment on your body with water feels like fighting a windmill. And when you give up on that dream, you return to your mud-colored room inside the insula. Very few people have the luxury of stepping into those massive marble rooms in the early hours of the morning, longing for a real cleanse. Naturally, the door handle is darkened and rusted from sweat. There are no gloves. The painful friction as you turn the handle and open the door may be from rubbing against the glass or the wall, or perhaps it is the rusted joints of your arm. The moment you step inside, the sunlight streaming in feels like the touch of a foreign angel on your neglected body. However, you cannot stay for more than a second. The room is hot, humid, and stuffy. There are no windows, or the wooden shutters are closed. Glass is a rare and expensive luxury item. You close the door, and breathing becomes a little more difficult, but you are still away from the rats. Finally, the toilet. This is perhaps the most terrifying and irreparable moment for a family in Rome. The joy of the intimate encounter with the toilet bucket is perhaps the closest experience to life itself. When you throw that bucket out into the street early in the morning, instead of the hope that spring brings, you are, as a result of all this morning cleaning and hygiene struggle, you are also left hungry, because the resistance mechanism you have barely managed to maintain until now is closely related to feeding yourself. The prolonged hunger in your metabolism creates a fragile balance. If you drink a little too much water, your circulation is disrupted. If you find a little too much food, you risk diarrhea. Every new battle you fight to rid yourself of parasites means another problem. The most deadly diseases among those living in Rome include the plague, typhus, dysentery, and malaria. All of these diseases resurfaced when people drank from contaminated wells or when pollution engulfed the city. You might ask, was there a healthcare system in Rome? There was, of sorts. In the city, healthcare providers known as medici combined knowledge from Hippocratic texts and Egyptian legends to prescribe treatments. But were they miracles? Never. Most of their medicines are mixtures of honey and herbs. There is no paracetamol. Fever-reducing pills are limited to liquids made from beech fruits. Bloodletting, shocking but true, is a method frequently used by doctors. They call it venesection, a cut made with the sharpest knives on the arm, collecting the life energy in a container. When you go to the hospital, there is no heating or sterilization of medical instruments. They are disinfected by burning them on a glass counter, but bacteria from the previous patient may not even be killed by the steam. When you think about all this, the long lines outside these large medical shops are like a theater where people display their hope for life. Some may spend money on a service to remove earwax from their ears using a spicillum, a thin metal rod, while others wait for a feast prepared by boiling gallstones, said to alleviate stomach pain. But the oily, fragrant liquid strained through those sieves is no divine gift. Even when poured into a porcelain bowl, each drop is a payment for the price of continuing to live. And if a violent malaria attack strikes you, the murky mixture of rat droppings and sewage can form a paste of microbes that emerges on your body like a plague-like swelling. The fever, the toothache, the trembling, all are signs of the desperate struggle to cling to life. If your fever doesn't break after a few days, no one will light a candle for you in the cold walls of the city. Perhaps you will be taken to the home of a doctor or a shaman-like healer, where your life will be cut short. The empire's healthcare system is of little use beyond throwing you into a hearse. In Rome, hygiene and health are not a single morning ritual, but a lifelong test. In this test, it is your body that runs the race. You, on the other hand, race against time to take care of that body, to feed it, clean it, protect it from parasites, avoid disease, and most importantly, keep it alive. Every moment of life is spent between sewage-like water, dirty clothes, parasitic infestations, bloodletting sessions, walking barefoot, suffocating humidity, hunger, and thirst. Thinking of the morning as a single cleaning ritual is misleading, because this is the first round, the first tension of the struggle to stay alive. And every morning, just making it to dawn becomes a miracle. As the warm light illuminates the city, you hope to get a piece of bread, drawing strength from the fact that you have managed to keep your body a little healthier. If you survive today, you know that all these morning rituals, the morning dampness, the morning struggles, in short, the hygiene test, are a small victory. If you've survived the morning rituals and the hygiene battle in the empire, now comes the hardest test: work. Rome is not just magnificent columns and dazzling palaces. The foundations of the empire are based on a class hierarchy that lies beneath the buildings, roads, bridges, and rivers built with blood, sweat, and tears. If you're at the bottom of this hierarchy, which you most likely are, then every day becomes a brutal performance filled with the hope of survival. And there are plenty of spectators, your bosses, inspectors, tax collectors, village guards, guild masters, even your neighbors. Everyone is watching your every move. From the moment you open your eyes, the buzz around you is sometimes the noise of stone quarries, sometimes the voices of craftsmen shouting at the wooden scaffolding of a theater under construction. You, however, are in the middle of this silence, ready for the day with a primitive shovel, iron sledgehammer, or pickaxe hanging around your neck like an earring. But how? While most people dream of finding another slice of bread at the baker's in the afternoon, you have to work like a rumbling engine even at the first light of dawn. Stone quarries. Rome's massive marble columns are built from blocks quarried from the Apennine Mountains. These quarries are the emperor's prized stone factories. When you take your first step into the quarry in the morning, not a single drop of sweat has yet begun to form. The rising sound of the quarry, resembling a machine, is not from marble cutting machines, but from the rhythm of the chisels, iron picks, and levers in the hands of a handful of workers. In the narrow corridors between the massive blocks, where light grows scarce, shadows stretch like monsters. As workers disappear into clouds of dust, you bend your back to adjust, support, lift, and pull a marble piece resembling a stele, perhaps a weight of over a ton. One wrong step and it collapses onto the stone. Bones crack, ribs shatter, blood spurts out. Yet you were the hands giving life to the column that would stand on the sacred marble road, one of the empire's sources of pride. Lowly occupied territories. The division between classes is very clear. On one side, the empire boasts of its great construction projects, which it presents as acts of benevolence. On the other side, you, as a member of the lowest class, carry bricks from morning to night. The bricks are first shaped from clay, then fired in a kiln. Since the day you swung that large shovel to mix the clay, you have not been able to hold anything lighter than a handful of clay in your hands. Moreover, in some periods, lime, sand, and wood ash are added to the brick mixture, filling your lungs with tiny particles of soil by the end of the day. With every breath, tiny particles penetrate your lungs. With every step, you hear the clear sound of the morning call to prayer. Aqueducts. Rome's engineering marvels, the aqueducts, are the lifelines that supply water to the fountains in the city center. Building these arches to stand upright while also constructing rainwater pools and dams is a complex task. Those who did this were not the empire's elite craftsmen. Even inexperienced slaves and temporary laborers were sometimes sent to work on these projects. You struggle to climb the wooden scaffolding, which resembles a high staircase. You must keep your feet firmly planted, or you will be dragged meters down into the mixture of earth and water, and may lose your life there. When you descend from the scaffolding, your shoulders and legs ache, but you walk toward the muddy paths and ruthless chimneys of the construction site. Farms and gardens. If you are sent to the countryside, the empire will put you to work pulling weeds, driving donkeys, planting corn in the fields, harvesting wheat, and spreading barley. There is no chance to rest in the shade of a hammock when the sun is at its zenith. Your skin peels under its scorching gaze. The earth tests your knees and ankles with every blow of the hoe. You don't even pick and choose between fleas, snakes, and scorpions, because the only options are to work or die. Sailors and oarsmen. Sometimes you are sent to row on merchant ships bound for distant lands to earn a meager living. The Mediterranean echoes with the sound of your oars. When you disembark at dawn, you join a team of 20 oarsmen. The whip at the front sets the rhythm of the oars. The last breath you take from your lungs sounds like a strange melody. When your breath fails you, you meet the water. You greet death. When you pause to catch your breath, drops of blood fall from your shoulders. Those drops are more valuable than every drop of blood flowing to the emperor's palace. Boss and inspector. The only person constantly watching your steps and performance is not the waterway supervisor, guildmaster, or village guard. In the empire, cheating is a capital offense. There is a daily quota set for each job. If you fail to meet the quota, for example, if you produce 480 bricks in 24 hours instead of 500, the inspectors will take you by the horns with a grain stick and drag you to a public humiliation ceremony. That stick, adorned with belts, is the only title you can hold before becoming the leader of the day. If the imperial envoys dressed in silk robes had taken a photo of your beating, it could have served as proof of how much Rome valued human rights. Slavery and freedom. At the lowest level are the slaves. Sometimes you are one of them. Your owner may not be a Roman citizen, but a legion commander or a merchant. If your duty is to open the bathhouse door when you are assigned to the line, you must stand under the dirty water. Slaves are free at certain times of the day. This freedom is merely an opportunity to transfer their own hardships to another class. To be free means to beg at the alms pit. Even so, it is better than free slavery. Even if you are humiliated, you can get up and leave. You never know whose attention you might catch while working. Sometimes security personnel, sometimes black-cloaked informants, sometimes gossiping neighbors. Every wound on your body, every mark, every drop of sweat is questioned. Is it just tax evasion, or is it theft? Even if you are the victim, you have no chance. The empire favors control over justice. The slightest missing work report is labeled an accident. Only in the case of an accident is your body likely to be ignored and collected from the back alleys. For a moment, you feel connected to life. The last drop of strength in your horse is the fragile gift of being human, a note on resilience and hope. If you've read this far, know that you're still lucky. No one can survive by working non-stop. Body and soul eventually break down. But in Rome, even if your teeth hit the hardest stones, you hold on to hope, a small moment of victory. The weight you feel when you tear a piece of heated metal from a stone slab and hold it in your hand may be a burden no one else can bear. But that burden is the last glimmer of hope floating at the day's highest point. Every brick you lay, every stone you cut, every stake you drive into the ground, you are a part of the empire's pride. The dust that falls to the ground is not ordinary dust. It is the trace of the empire's existence in the annals of time, the remnant of your labor completely sacrificed. And when your life ends, perhaps the only inscription written for you is this: "This is the grave of the worker who fell for the name of Rome." With the first light of dawn, you awoke and once again threw yourself into the struggle for life on the stone-paved streets. If you have survived the work and punishment struggle described in the 4th chapter, you will now face a more personal, more internal test, being a woman in Rome and bearing the burden of family life. Whether slave or free plebeian, freedom for women is at best a fiction. In reality, it is a story of resistance that must be rewritten every day. You wake up in a room between the cool walls of the insula, the smallest unit of the household. When the door of the house opens with the faint rustling of goatskin chains still hanging from the wooden bells, the sunlight does not feel good, because that light enters the sheets and reminds you of the bed bugs on your body. The cramps you feel are not the pangs of digestion that begin before your lungs are full. They are the tremors of the children who fit into a large box before you. In Rome, women are forced to go to bed before the bread lines in the middle of the night. The night is long, cruel, and full of fear. The bed becomes a dilemma. You try to suppress the pain at the tip of your finger because one of your children will wake up needing to use the toilet. While the Sanskrits speak of bright days, in Rome there are long nights. If you are a slave, night watch is your duty. Feeding the child, fetching water, lighting a fire with the dry wood pile that signals the donkey. Hope for the days to come may be hidden in the most harmless toy fragments. But there are no toys. Even a crocheted baby pattern is something you cannot possess. The gift is a couple of dried grapes, and sometimes you cannot even find those. Is it the morning call to prayer, or the cry of a child that wakes you? Sometimes both. The sounds of cows from the surrounding minarets, the clucking of chickens, and the cry of an inexperienced vendor shouting, "Panis calidus," hot bread, mingle together. Your body, like an unhealed wound, hopes for mercy and tests itself once more for the child in your womb. Being a woman in Rome means carrying not only the safety of your own blood, but also that of generations, or its price. You want to taste a slice of bread by eating dough from your empty stomach, but even dough is expensive. You know you have to get your share from your rich neighbor's stone oven. The share you get is breadcrumbs, but if there are crumbs, you look back at the long line waiting in the back alley, hoping that someone else has found your crumbs and is happy. Women's freedom is limited within the borders of the empire. Male citizens either have the right to marry a Roman woman, or this right has been taken away from them. In small villages, the family order, religion, or the emperor's orders impose new rules on women every day. You cannot go to the fields today. There is an imperial puppet show. You may go to the bathhouses today, but take the donkey herder with you. Freedom for women is not a right of citizenship, but an enigma as uncertain as the number of petals on a daisy. Giving birth is like carrying a wounded soldier on a battlefield. The most precious thing you love in this world is the little life growing inside you. But bringing that life into the world, without modern painkillers, through knife-wielding uterine interventions, with pains that feel like your body is being torn apart for days, is an ordeal. There is no such place as a maternity ward. Births take place in hammocks made of mud in the village square. While these public moments of horror unfold, you are awarded a plaque for increasing the family. Welcome baby, welcome woman, welcome motherhood. Then the symphony of welcome illness, welcome risk of death begins. After birth, men gain the right to citizenship, known as civitas. For women, it is the domestic life of uxoritas. Years of pain and anxiety are etched into your destiny. Your husband, who, even if he is a free citizen, is mostly not a cruel intellectual, but a legionnaire who occasionally gets drunk, goes out to raise a glass with his friends when his time comes, while you are busy boiling milk at home to feed your child. To support your family, you take on extra work. You dye fabric, sew, weave, sell doll dresses made of silk thread at the village festival, and sometimes copy simple texts onto parchment. Women in Rome do not write, but if you have learned to read and write a little, danger begins. Every line you read could be a spy document against the emperor. Reading and writing are not a blessing for women. They may be a death sentence. Even in rural areas, there is domestic violence. The husband is not a slave, but patria potestas, the father's right to do as he pleases, restricts women for years, even behind closed doors. Inside the house, there are shouts, slaps, curses. This is the vitamin of the family order. Social norms dictate it. Even a free woman does not accuse her husband, nor does she allow others to whisper about her honor. Yet you know that honor is as easy to steal as the name of a piece of stolen property. In Rome, even if monogamous, marriage sacrifices a woman's right to bear children, legitimate or illegitimate, for the sake of a man's sexual rights. The empire wants its population to grow every day. Every baby in your womb is a source of population. If you give birth to a son, your loyalty to the emperor increases. If you give birth to a daughter, you feel as if the empire has no need for you. But you must still give birth. Otherwise, you will not have the right to complete the sacred duty of your unfinished ceremony. For women, the day lasts only until nightfall. That night, there is no sleep, only grief. When a child cries so hard it makes you go blind, you wake up halfway from your tired sleep with your heart pounding. Listening to your drunken husband's footsteps approaching the house, the children huddle under a chair again, and there is a slight commotion once more. What if I die? You think, what if I leave? But you don't leave because the price of freedom is the chains around the necks of your loved ones. This world is not filled with Rome's geraniums and olive oil paintings. It is filled with muddy streets, sinful stone walls, rituals, and the secret captivity of being a woman. Here, every moment you gain status is a step across a threshold into heavier chains. If women are liberated, say the philosophers, Rome will rise. But you know that there is no freedom here, only quieter forms of slavery. And if you can still see, if you still look eagerly at your children's smiles, this is not freedom. It is the greatest trick of the game. Because in Rome, women experience the pain of childbirth, domestic violence, street journalism, bread lines, the cries of the bathhouses, and most importantly, the forced rebirth of themselves every day. Every moment you survive and can hold your children close is a victory. But the taste of that victory is overshadowed by the immense despair that settles over you in the evening darkness. You don't have the energy to count how many hours you've walked on the moldy stone streets in the morning, because in Rome, justice begins as dark as the clouds before the morning call to prayer. The situation is not a simple crime-punishment formula. Here, the accusation of crime is a political maneuver, entertainment, a threat, and a simulation of survival. Perhaps the few coins that fall from your pocket while buying woman slippers for your child will one day be the judge's gavel before your eyes. Perhaps haggling over the price you offer in the market will turn into an implicit accusation of tax evasion. The laws of the empire are not inscribed on the stone tablets of the stone council chambers, but in the rumors circulating among the people, in acts of brutality, and in the bureaucratic traps that operate like machines. Early in the morning, you mingle with the crowd gathered around the fingered galleries of the open-air meeting place called the Forum, waiting for intervention. Here, every second, someone is being sued. Usury, adultery, kidnapping, blasphemy, punishable by death. There is no courtroom. Justice is as random as a stone thrown from behind a column or onto an empty altar platform. The indictment is no more official than the website of a bureaucrat who had his name carved into stone years ago. The rumor that the butcher's son had an affair with the daughter of a high-ranking official is whispered into the ears of the prosecutors. 3 days later, you find yourself testifying and begging for 1,000 lira. Is there anyone who can defend him? Those allowed to defend themselves are the advocati, the official scourges of the empire, who are scribes and lawyers. These individuals are not educated in universities. They learn about crimes from acquaintances who have committed them and are master chroniclers who transform petitions into today's single-page web forms. Hiring an advocatus is like putting 2 extra coins under your plate. When you extend your hand with the money, the emptiness of your palm is as damning as the money itself. If you don't pay, your defense is condemned to silence in court. Even if you're innocent, you'll be silenced. One of the eyes watching you in the dark is holding the paper on which the prosecutor is taking notes. The accusator. The accusator is far more dangerous than your enemy, because they can make accusations for personal vendettas, inheritance disputes, street fights, extortion, or even revenge against an ex-lover. Even if you are innocent, the accusator's appearance in court and his look at you is like a hiss from the throat that means, "I know you." And in Rome, human relationships are as contagious as the sale of donkeys in a chicken coop. The immoral whispers you hear while kneeling before a thirsty lawyer are equivalent to an admission that this case is a conspiracy dreamed up by a high-ranking official. No matter what the case is about, the court does not dispense justice but decides who has thick skin and who has thin skin. The judges, clad in long robes, sometimes sit right next to you. Your elegance is but a speck compared to your ability to raise your hand and take an oath in a large assembly hall. Because even if you have been a slave all your life, or a shepherd for years, you are only considered a public witness in the context of civil law. Swearing an oath without even opening your lips is contrary to court rules. One of the layers that form the backbone of the judiciary are special courts called centumviri. These courts deal primarily with inheritance cases, because inheritance, the property left behind by the deceased, is the greatest form of wealth in Rome. It is very rare for your father to leave behind a field or an olive grove, but if your father dies, you must follow a 200-year-old list of relatives to claim the inheritance. According to the stories, a handful of nobles are the third-generation sons of your father's second-generation nephews. It is said that the inheritance goes to whoever finds them. Meanwhile, you struggle with the rally-like questions of the city's severi, a group of elderly judges. Are you really the last conservative of the 15th generation? Do you have any siblings? If you do, what is your share? If the decision goes against you, you are confined to a narrow alley, because the courts take into account the honor of Rome and the reputation in the eyes of the people when making their decisions. One of the elderly judges steps forward. Rome values simplicity in inheritance law. Please stop the gossip. You weep, for according to simplicity, you experience the harshest form of everything. The decision is as cold as a stone. All property shall be given to your youngest relative, whose broken cry cannot even influence a broken axle. Such is the dry and hopeless nature of a court decision in Rome. Even the number of coins in your pocket no longer holds any meaning. Another type of court is the questiones perpetuae, or perpetual punishment courts. Here, publica cases such as adultery, rape, and murder are heard. That is, if your crime is to be recorded in the emperor's book of sins, you are sent there. The questions perpetua trial process is like navigating a labyrinth in today's interactive courtroom web apps. After filing a case, the prosecutor has 3 days to present evidence. Otherwise, the case is dismissed. But Dismissal is as dangerous as a thorn in your foot. The charge in a dismissed case is deemed to have been proven due to insufficient evidence, thereby restoring the defendant's reputation. And in Rome, reputation is as valuable as property. There are also defenses carried out by force of arms. A few swindlers offer to arrange a fight that will prove your innocence if you participate in the trial. In Rome, proving one's innocence through combat is a ritual called a duel. However, this ritual is not official and is only practiced by underground fighters. The fighting technique involves fists, not swords, and the winner is responsible for collecting the body. The outcome of the trial is sometimes as clear as a bloody explosion. Yes, he struck the judge twice with his fists, and the judge fell to the ground, so he is innocent. While two people are fumbling with their pants pockets, the official court record is more reliable than the court itself. The phrase that slips from the prosecutor's lips, who seeks the death penalty, is, "In Rome, justice always ends in death." In fact, the outcome is like a distilled death. For some, execution in the open field. For others, forced to drink poisoned water. For others, boiled in boiling water. And for others, beaten with a baton before a foreign court president, forced to kneel and say, "Kneel before Jupiter." Whichever is chosen, a last-minute plea for mercy is granted only if it coincides with a kinship connection to one of the emperor's envoys. Meanwhile, words themselves are meaningless, for you cannot even find a shadow to read the court's verdict. Torture is not merely a part of the punishment. Sometimes it is the punishment itself. There were even those who paid money for culus, or voluntary confession. A perverse interrogation became fashionable. "I am guilty. Please torture me so I can confess and reveal the purpose of the raider's sharp birds." It may sound ridiculous, but after the trial, the torturers would buy coffee for the saved prisoner. That coffee? Hot water with a handful of dandelion leaves, so harmless that even the emperor's official pharmacist wouldn't use it. In the end, coffee was the most expensive pain among the emperor's papers. There is also a savut's defense in court. However, this is not an official appeal similar to today's legal theses. It is called salim, a personal blessing, a talisman ritual. It is when a Medici pederast writes a spell saying, "Give me a piece of dry bread to secure your justice." The moment you perform this magical ritual, the person you bring to court swears 3 times that they are either the judge's father or related to the emperor. These oaths are usually false. However, the penalty for perjury in court is sometimes double the minimum wage. Perhaps it is doubled to ensure that you do not get your way. While the bells of reliable justice ring during the day, the darkness of night makes you feel like you're in a confetti-filled Zoom platform where even your room number is forgotten. Rome's courtroom resembles the dark corners of a nightmare. People arrested for trivial reasons, counting the days behind bars like criminals, screaming in a crowd of excitement and despair. And in the empire, true justice is standing by your side and saying, "Get well soon." The judicial system aims to protect social order, not justice. Order sometimes becomes a stone pillar that you think is your father's only ex libris. Everyone is guilty. To rule is to scatter even the innocent among the guilty. One day, perhaps this order will change, and the law will prevail, and in court, the judge will reveal who is right with the clarity of a multiple-choice answer key. But until that day comes, you will continue to play your role as a poor actor in a tragic play, wandering the dark corridors of the courtroom in the guise of a scapegoat. This is the other face of justice in Rome, a mafia relationship that changes its form, a threat squeezed between smiles, a crumb of hope carved into the walls, and ultimately, a joke that could end in death. Every case is more of a game board measuring who holds power and who gives it than a lesson in humanity. Long before the first light of dawn, when the street lamps are still lit and the iron gates are locked, you catch the first signs of Rome's hidden soul. These signs creep through the stone buildings surrounding you and sink into your heart. For the true power of the empire lies not only in the sword or in the domes of the palaces of power, but in the steps taken during a shadow ceremony, in the moments of silence in the forum squares where every step echoes. Entertainment, ceremony, and religion are like an invisible wheel that keeps even the Christian basilicas, which rose in place of the once burnt pagan temples, alive, a machine in which every part is carefully placed in its proper place. Consider first the gladiatorial arenas, the cheers echoing off the ruined marble steps of the Colosseum, sweeping the crowd between anger, joy, fear, and gratitude. There are also night games that last until dawn, public feasts called munera, held by the dim light of gas lamps. The sandy ground, dug up by the claws of legionnaires fresh from battle, mixes with sword blows and bullfights. As you walk among the unwashed bloodstains, one question lingers in your mind. Is it the living who are strong here, or the dead who are sacred? Then you move on to the theaters. Suddenly, hundreds of masks are affixed to the actors' faces, accompanied by an emotional orchestra. You watch the stage, witnessing a synthesis of Anatolian-inspired tragedies, Egyptian-origin comedies, and tragedy techniques borrowed from Athens. An actor complains in a voice so loud that it cannot even fit into the huge dome of the church. The cry between the Caliboter stones seems to reach the corridors of Emperor Claudius's palace. The peak of entertainment is as delicate as your soul and as painful as your heart. As for official ceremonies, under the dome of the Pantheon, you witness the annual celebrations, executions, horse races, and sacrifice rituals held before the emperor's statue. The blood dripping from the horns of the sacrificed animals forms a tableau that envelops the white marble floor. Every whisper hints that the sacrifice is opening a door to another world. The Vestal virgins dance among the temple processions, winking at you with torches carrying the sacred fire. Your breath is filled with both fear and sanctity. Religion spills out from both public buildings and private homes. There are lavish displays of pomp and circumstance, as well as healing rituals in small home shrines. Flowers thrown at the statues of Neptune at the head of the waterways combine with the masks of the genies hung on the doors of houses. Even in your small room at home, you will find an altar, a small marble bowl containing fresh grapes, milk, and thyme, a morsel offered to the gods. These three themes, entertainment, ceremony, and religion, are woven into every fiber of the empire. You cannot survive without being part of these rituals, and without you, the spirit of Rome cannot truly breathe. Because the empire is not a single entity, it stands on the shared memories, shared fears, and shared joys of millions. Entertainment, ceremony, and religion are the pure reflection of these shared emotions. In the Roman Empire, trade is as ruthless as the sword and as sacred as the gods. Before the gray mist of dawn has lifted, the salty smell of the sea wafts from the ships anchored in the harbor. This smell is like a lake mixed with olive oil and beeswax which lubricate the wheels of the empire. Calm on the surface, but the waters beneath stir up storms. Rome's roads are no different from the emperor's caravans. Its rivers bear the tracks of cargo-laden boats. The bronze scales on the market stalls draw a new circle of wealth with each day's earnings. Your work is to navigate the delicate boundaries of trade. On a caravan bridge, you carry the list of goods that will reach the Mediterranean the next day. This list is filled with grain from Anatolia, papyrus from Egypt, silver ore from Spain, and red rubies from Mesopotamia. If you work in a warehouse in a port district, every amphora you hold in your hands holds the mystical secret of a story. It is wine, honey, a taste you will test to win your interest, and when you drink it while bowing your head, you will feel both a flowing excitement and a passion that pierces your skin with its heat. If you are a sailor, you carry gloom in the shadow of the sails that open with a great roar, taking the wind at your back. You tie the ship to the port until morning, only to be greeted by a crowd as dense as pebbles for a few dinars, then release the anchor and set sail, using the compass as your guide. This dazzling investment is sometimes a profit shared by hundreds, sometimes a risk drowned by a few raindrops. A caravan or shipwreck brings far worse consequences than losing one's bread. Perhaps hundreds perish in an instant. Yet trade is an electric current that stimulates the nerves of Rome. Every moment you are on the brink of death, you tremble like a live bomb ready to explode. Roman currency is one of the symbols of bronze, iron, silver, and gold. As you gaze at the engraved surfaces of silver coins, each one is as small as a quadrans, but symbolizes the emperor's power. Every 100 coins that pass through your fingers may pay for a slave's month of torture or the thick plaster of walls that muffle a gladiator's screams. Tax collectors knock on your door at dawn. You are obligated to pay the tributum tax in April, July, and October. Evading taxes carries a punishment more severe than the sword. Sometimes slaves are punished, and even nobles deemed untouchable are forced to sign documents. In the bustling marketplaces where supply and demand dance, sellers set the price of next autumn's crops in advance. The meat broth simmering in copper pots feeds the barley meatballs that will be eaten at makeshift stalls. Sugar sold by the kilogram becomes a symbol of wealth for the rich. Even a few pieces in the hands of the poor are the heaviest burden of luxury. As you carefully select one of the spice jars lined up on your stall, you know whose eyes you are stealing. The conscious luxury consumption of wealthy women, stealing the water that sustains their lives, drop by drop. The dark side of trade is the black market. Smugglers operating between a few shops distribute silk from the east, ivory statues that would surpass those of Africa, and Persian cotton fabrics to your hands despite imperial prohibitions. You go to a back alley vendor disguised as a customer. You test the metal coins hidden in sacks whose contents you cannot discern, stored in generous quantities. This trade is both life-saving and life-threatening. The empire's guards may come to destroy this market, tearing the stall apart and sending it to hell. Your generation may conquer countries, but prostitution, gambling, smuggling, alcohol, and slave trade will never end. Rome doesn't draw a line called conscience, even within its own borders. A trade sector parallel to entertainment, ceremonies, and religion has emerged, as powerful as official banks and as fiery as underground casinos. In one corner, young girls anoint themselves with fragrant oils at the feet of Zeus statues, while on the other, gamblers sell tickets like harvest machines rolling dice. That die is like the pages of your destiny flying open. But the real complexity begins with the opening of the Viae roads connecting different regions to trade. These roads are hailed as engineering marvels, but they are also black roads. As you harness a cart, you hear the clanging of knives mingling with the clatter of horse hooves. Another group of nomads, plague victims, fugitives, madmen traveling in the evening darkness. You keep your eyes peeled to ensure your cargo arrives safely, A moment's inattention, a donkey's stumble, an amphora thrown onto the road. For every day you earn, you write a new death register. You know trade from the cargoes arriving from Baghdad, Damascus, Carthage, and Hispania. Each comes with its own language, religion, and market psychology. Rome's economy flows drop by drop into the coffers of small city-states like Sodom. As you watch each drop fall like a snowflake between your eyebrows, you learn how the economy works and how prices are determined. Roman currency is counted in denarius. This denarius is as complex as today's credit card statement. The head of a large town guild oversees your labor, just like an emperor. He will give verbal approval and sometimes stamp it on paper. Earning money is hard work. Losing it is a blow heavier than a Japanese samurai's honor. There were years when even the Antoninianus gold coins lost their value in Rome. Inflation melts away like ammunition stockpiled for ore weapons. A single as coin that enters your pocket one day can be worth 3 times its face value the next month. In such times, caravan expenses go unpaid, ship insurance goes unpaid, and tax collectors knock on the door. Despite all this crisis, trade continues, because the Roman merchant feels his passion is heavier than a sword. Sometimes in the evenings, after finishing your work, you seek refuge in a corner of a bathhouse. There, you find yourself among singers performing acrobatics, elderly men testing the hot water flowing from the aqueducts, and workers carving muddy clay while keeping an eye on their earnings. You lose track of time. You feel the entire geography, the entire history, and the entire religion within you. Trade in Rome is both a sacred ritual and an inescapable hell. Every success symbolizing Rome's power is more than a praise poem. It is an epic written in blood, sweat, tears, and sometimes treachery. The emperor's legions are the outstretched arms of the empire. You are the armor designer who carries these arms. Perhaps the iron armor you draw on a stand has a task as vital as the rhythm of the pickaxe blows striking the steel. Because every piece of armor is a soldier's hope. Every sword is the emperor's map. The first glimmers of morning sunlight are like the light reflecting off the horse hoof prints in the camp. The camp is much simpler than the luxurious ceremonies of the palace, but just as rigorous. The wooden huts, the trash in the mud, and the thorny bushes along the walking paths are both shelter and enemy ambushes. As you provide engineering support to the emperor's armies, you do not merely transport supplies, you carry morale. The axes, shovels, and picks arranged in a 4-wheeled cart are soldiers assigned to the emperor's next battle plan. First mission: the siege of a small castle near Tripoli. Legionnaires march in the scorching heat of May, drenched in sweat. Young recruits, newly enlisted, feel not the excitement of heading to a castle for the first time, but the fear of being trapped in a starless night. Stones taken from ammunition pits are loaded into the leather bags of catapults. Instead of singers sighing in the corners, like they're reciting prayers, the loud sounds of catapult craftsmen at work fill the air. The metallic rumble of a catapult stone being launched is like a letter sent to the emperor. Power is rising from here. Your role as a stone master is not only to prepare the materials, but also to keep the catapult's barrel in good condition. The barrel is a thick frame covered with leather. This leather is damaged after each launch. The only thing you must pay attention to when replacing it is to ensure that the machine functions as smoothly as the impact of the stone embedded in the distant red domes of the enemy lines. For a catapult does not fire stones in vain. There is a complex equation involving the number of lashes per man and the number of stones, and you are the solution partner in this equation. The siege lasts for days. In the early days, the legionnaires count the small scars under their spiked helmets as if reading phosphorescent letters lined up one after another. They keep the legend of survival alive in their shelters by drinking moldy milk. At night, the castle's sentries are watched by lantern light. A sentry positioned on a hill near where you throw your spears guides you like the wind. You take this wind like a metal ruler and bend it into the catapult. The next stage is the demolition of the walls. Tunnels are dug beneath the walls. Every bucket of earth is another kilometer of the Empire's fortifications. When the wooden supports beneath the wall are cut, the wall collapses with invisible tremors. But nothing is as false as the safety of the dug tunnel. A moment of collapse buries a group of soldiers walking inside in the ground. Some days, instead of soldiers, stones and soil come together. Other days, an enemy hidden in the soil rises up in ambush. And as you do your job as a stonemason, you do more than just carry materials. You don't even realize that you are building a graveyard. Now imagine a rebellion. A hermit organizes a popular uprising against the emperor's tax increase. The rebellion that breaks out in a small town erupts right across from where your work began. The city's dungeons hang in the sky like lion posters in the shadow of the catapult you destroyed. The people rebel against paying for water and loot the aqueducts. If you are part of the team repairing the aqueducts, one morning you will escape from among the stones of the aqueduct being smashed with a huge hammer, along with fugitive criminals. Put yourself in the shoes of a mafia lawyer. Justice has been replaced by resistance. But this time, the rebels turn into fireball launchers. As you wrap the defense buildings in invasive tarpaulins like steel plates, the engineering marvels of the pavement stones engage in hand-to-hand combat in the neighborhood square. After listening to the tunnels beneath the walls and feeling the echo of every stone you shadowed with your catapult through your headphones, you witness the army's unarmed clash with the people. Archers rain arrows into the sky with the complexity of a real fairground fire. With every whistling arrow you hear, you must listen for the sound of victory. Victory is not measured by how much blood is spilled, but by how high a ladder is climbed. Another type of victory is called an overseas expedition. If you work in the port city of Ostia, as you load goods onto the departing ship, you touch a wall story as rich in history as the amphorae lined up on the ship's stern. This ship is the screen leading to the Empire's milk port. Every soldier who travels carries the Emperor's claim to international rights. As you repair the fishing net, you can even guess the friction in the threads of the net. For that friction is as unique a detail as the winged torch embedded in the Emperor's banner. And then, the commander's return. The flowers, banners, and shouts of joy thrown at the returning fleet are as bright as the foam at the bottom of a wine glass. You return to the streets where the horse hoof prints have faded, finding new cries, new funeral processions, and new cries of sacrifice instead of betrothed soldiers. For in Rome, a victory celebrated with such grandeur can sometimes be as brief as a simple death notice at the emperor's command. In the shadow of these victories, another rebellion, a slave uprising. You may be a repair worker in a mansion outside the city. Someone attacks you with an iron bar in their hand. The slaves rebel not because of your work style, but to reach the ultimate point of freedom. As you bend the cage bars with your hands, they swing their swords as sharply as samurai swords. When the slave revolt is suppressed, the empire declares victory. But this victory is as vivid as a continent you rewrite with every step you take, not in the emperor's victory tent. We spoke of armies, victories, and revolts. These three characters, which showcase Rome's power, form the imperial machine as a whole. You are within that machine, feeling the pain of every finger that touches an iron gear and the cold expression of a stone rolling and toppling towers. Every new era is translated into an emperor's statue, but the millions crushed beneath that statue are the most genuine witnesses to who writes history. Once considered the heart of the world, the Roman Empire was inevitably driven into decline after its glorious age. You experienced this century-long decline as a bureaucrat, merchant, or soldier of the empire. Like everyone else, you first heard about it in the news, then saw it in the ruins of temples and palaces. As tragic as the emotion was, the shadow of its legacy was just as long. For before Rome withdrew from the stage of history, it left behind not just piles of stone, but also legends, legal systems, language, and urban planning. Foundations that were engraved in the collective memory of humanity. In the West, the empire's power was shaken by internal strife and external attacks from the 3rd century onwards. Famine had struck the small province where you served. Bread ran out in the city markets, and caravan routes were plundered. By the year 270, Emperor Aurelian began repairing the walls by turning the port cities inward. But the moral collapse in these cities, now painted in darkness, was severe. If you were a baker, one morning you replaced the faded SPQR letters on the stone wall of your oven with new posters. "You are powerless," the graffiti whispered, echoing the people's rebellion. These lines had become an official declaration symbolizing the final crisis of Rome. While the people struggled with economic turmoil, they were also changing emperors. After a series of short-lived emperors, Diocletian attempted to halt the crisis with administrative reforms in 284. As a civil servant, you tried to attach the newly divided provincial maps to the country, but the paperwork had piled up. The new administrative system advocated a 4-part governance model known as the Tetrarchy. The emperor was divided into 2, and the commander-in-chief of the army was also divided into 2. The people became acquainted with 4 separate dynasties, but each dynasty also compiled its own list of victims. While this model temporarily stabilized trade and governance, it failed to preserve the people's trust like a talisman, because in Rome, the crisis was carried in the hearts of the people more than in the reforms of the government. Still, the legacy cannot be erased, even after years. Roman law, especially the principles of ius civile and ius gentium, deeply influenced medieval and Renaissance jurists. You might have been a law clerk, a court guard. Thanks to that legacy, in another empire, in the draft laws of another country, Rome's senatus consultum would appear as initials. Even today, the concept of Roman law, which forms the foundation of civil law systems, shines like a beam of light from the parchments you once held in your hands. The most dramatic moment of the fall was the invasion of Rome by the Visigoths in 410. You may have been in the Coptic quarter that day, or perhaps you were a plasterer in a bathhouse. The streets were filled with the shadows of spears, shields, and iron helmets. In the frescoes painted on the walls of a monastery, St. Jerome held the Latin alphabet in his hands. Even as you waited in line for bread, your eyes seemed to search for the saint's boldest notes. For the barbarians who entered Rome were not just a foreign army to you. They seemed to pierce the heart of the empire itself. Your true legacy, however, was urban planning and city design. Rome pioneered modern urban planning with its logarithmic city layout. As you gazed at the bricks in the basilicas built at the base of the city walls, you realized that those same bricks formed the foundation of medieval city walls. Even the shape of the arches in Gothic cathedrals bore the traces of Roman concrete. As you mixed that concrete, You would have thought about how the formula, blended with the geological and hydraulic knowledge of Roman engineers, was copied around the world. Another legacy was in language. If you had been a linguist, you would have sought the essential elements of Latin in the prayers of the Christian Church and listened to the symphony of words rising from the Pope's sermons. The Romance languages derived from Latin still introduce their children as children of Rome, without even needing to mention your name. When you listen closely, you can hear the echo of Latin letters flowing from the hearts of a Spaniard, an Italian, or a Frenchman. The unification of Christianity as the official religion in 380 AD transformed the landscape of popular belief. The sacrifices once offered in pantheons became sermons and rituals in churches. If you had been a priest's apprentice, you would have heard the prayers dancing in the light among the mosaics on the basilica windows. Those prayers were more powerful than the emperor's palace expenditures, for they united people in a common conscience. The power of religion lay not in the posters on the streets of Rome, but in the delicate parchments of Solomon, engraved in the hearts of the people. The cultural heritage was even more extensive. The fairy tales brought by actors from Egypt bore traces of African dance. If you were an actor on the theater stage, you would feel the traces of every nation behind the mask on your face. This cultural diversity was as vibrant as the pagan rituals of the pre-Christian era, but it was this diversity that kept the empire's ecumenical spirit alive. Finally, the fall of Rome laid the foundations for a new order. Looking at medieval maps, you could see the stone texture of Roman roads and discover the map of new capitals under the arched shadows of aqueducts. Geography may have changed, but the emperor's vision remained intact. You were a cartographer of this vision. In every new map you read, you would see traces of Rome's legacy. The legend does not begin with Rome's death, it begins with its resurrection. As you gaze upon this heap of ashes, you can still see the city's shadows even a century later. A mosaic fragment, a broken brick, or a few lines of Latin text can all reveal the shadow of the empire. Even if Rome falls, its legacy will endure forever, for the true power of the empire lies not in iron armor or sword blows, but in the ideas etched into the human soul. Although the Roman Empire was officially erased from the pages of history, its legacy lives on not in the dusty annals of history, but in the names of streets, institutions, legal texts, and our cultural codes. When you glance at a modern law draft written in pencil in a library, the paragraph numbering still resembles that of Rome's 12 tables of law. You may simply mimic this numbering as a law student. However, every line of the tradition it leaves behind echoes the empire's ideals of democracy and law. And today, the decision documents of the European Council carry little difference from the spear thrusts and whispers of ancient Roman Senate texts. There are so many things in everyday life that bear the name Roman: metro line numbers, the eagle symbol in sports team logos, even engravings of Cupa Romanorum on the handles of wine glasses in the kitchen. When you walk into a cafe, you might even see maps of Rome adorned with images of ancient columns on the napkin holder on the table. Every detail is a door opening to the timeless spirit of that empire. You cannot resist opening these doors and shedding light on the dark corridors of history. In literature, as you trace the lines of Dante and Petrarch, the word Rome carries them like a bridge to the ancient age. Today, when you begin a novel and come across a reference to the shadows of Rome in the author's sentences, this is not merely a literary trend. It is the awakening of a 2,000-year-old cultural subconscious. The footsteps of the heroes of novels are as deep as the marks left by eagle claws on the ground, because the concept known as the spirit of Rome is an invisible force that nourishes the themes of freedom, honor, and justice in such stories. When it comes to the silver screen, the swords of the legionnaires in epic war films are like the shadow effects in Tacitus's tales of conquest. While watching a film, instead of being swept away by the screams on the muddy floor of the gladiator arena, you follow the rhythm of the horns playing in the director's soundtrack. Ave, Caesar, morituri te salutant. The tension in these words matches the rhythm of your heart. And in the background, the dusty surface of ancient Roman roads carries a texture far more realistic than the CGI effects of modern war films. The influence of Rome is also evident in architectural trends. The columned facades of neoclassical buildings offer a symmetry that is easy on the eye, while the marble floors used in interior spaces carry a sense of prestige that has been preserved for centuries. When you enter a public building, the marble steps remind you of the basilica courtyards of the Roman Forum. The civicus spiritus, or civic spirit, the awareness of being part of a city community, lives on today in municipal meetings and discussions before local referendums. You may be designing these spaces as an urban planner, but behind every line lie the principles of firmitas, utilitas, venustas, solidity, utility, beauty, of the ancient architect Vitruvius. The remnants of the Roman system are also evident in public administration. The bureaucratic structure resembles the state system inherited from the imperial period. When preparing an embassy note, the correspondence procedure still carries a formal respect mechanism close to the senatus consultum order. As a diplomat preparing a message, you imitate the spirit of a messenger, presenting news to the emperor. Phrases like, "Your Majesty," presented before you, become talismanic words, defending the throne in today's correspondence protocol. The emphasis on Latin in educational institutions still persists. If you were a Latin teacher at a school, instead of encouraging students to use their daily spoken language, you would introduce them to the rich literature of ancient Rome. You would say, "Take a sentence from Cicero," and advise them to discover the heart of the Roman Senate. Students would initially hesitate, recognizing Latin roots in the worn pages of the book, but they would eventually realize that this language is not merely an ancient relic, but the mother of modern languages and a metaphor sharper than a weapon, serving as a tool for thought. In medical terminology, words like vena cava, arteria, or septum have Latin roots. As a medical student working in an anatomy lab, you know which chamber of the heart you're referring to when you say atrium, because these terms are echoes of notes scribbled on the tools of ancient Roman surgeons. Those tools may not be as advanced as today's titanium forceps in operating rooms, but they represent the first generation of an information network, a map of the human body, first drawn in Latin concepts. In the field of law, concepts like habeas corpus and due process are cornerstones of Anglo-American law. When you defend these concepts as a lawyer, you can almost hear the echoes of ancient Roman civil rights. Habeas corpus claims are like a reflex resisting the first edicts of imprisonment issued from the emperor's castle. They are not just words, but a 1,000-year-old practice of seeking justice. In the realm of religion, the division of Christianity into Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant denominations is the evolution of the Roman-centered faith throughout the Middle Ages. The papacy held executive power, just like the ancient emperors. If you were a theologian, you could consciously equate the titles you see in the church hierarchy today, bishop, cardinal, pope, with today's diplomatic ranks. because they are all titles that represent heavenly authority in the eyes of the people. Reflections of the Roman legacy are also widespread in social life. The rituals of marriage ceremonies bear traces of public ceremonies. If you were a marriage counselor, when giving the ring to the finger of one of the couple, you would explain the legend of the ring of eternity behind that small circle. It originates from the rings exchanged during Roman wedding ceremonies. Those rings symbolized the alliance between families. The modern concept of a forum, the virtual marketplace of social media platforms, is the digital counterpart of the Roman forum market. If you were a software developer, you would compare the like button on the main menu to the voting fingers of Roman citizens in the public assembly. The way those assembly members raised their voices without caring about the cracking of the chairs is a democratic echo that mirrors today's tweet storms. In the fashion world, toga, stola, and tunic designs are reborn on couture runways. If you were a fashion designer, you might think, "It's been years since we've had papyrus from Rome," when selecting fabric for a haute couture dress, blending ancient weaving techniques with contemporary trends. Thus, the fabric's surface tells a story as weighty as the curtains of an emperor's palace. In the military realm, cloaks, helmets, and armor are reimagined as steampunk accessories. If you were a concept artist, you would integrate gladiator sword and shield designs into modern warjet cockpits. Crocodile leather straps would serve as a legacy carrier, combining functionality and aesthetics, just like the sandals of Roman gladiators. In the end, even if the Roman Empire were to crumble, its ideas, order, and culture would endure in the human spirit. As you walk beneath a street lamp today, the mosaic tiles on the wall of an atlas carry their vibrant colors, defying the concrete silhouette of modern life. You, even under this shadow, build the future with the same enthusiasm as an ancient mosaic artisan assembling bricks. Because the legacy you speak of is not merely stone, it is the human mind, spirit, and stance. Every new moment is like a call from history, gazing into Rome's shadow and declaring, "Though they have gone, I remain here." And you are the most vibrant embodiment of that call, the contemporary Roman who answers it. Centuries have passed since the fall of the Roman Empire. Its lands were divided, its cities destroyed, its statues shattered. Yet the wind that blows through these ruins still seems to carry the footsteps of the legions that once shook Carthage. Today, as a traveler fascinated by history, an archaeologist, or a history teacher, you reach out to ancient ruins around the world to catch the scent of those footsteps. Like a living vein within the stone, they whisper the epic tales of centuries past. In the early morning hours, before the sun has warmed the mosaic walls atop the hills, you walk through the dusty streets of Pompeii. The limestone pavements beneath your feet were once the paths Roman citizens took to their morning tasks, long before Mount Vesuvius blanketed them in ash in 79 AD. Now, the lines between those pavements serve as a bridge extending all the way to souvenir photographers. As a tour guide, you wander through the film reel of history. With every step, you challenge yourself with questions like, what would a Roman peasant have thought? What would a merchant have carried in his hands? How would a gladiator have navigated this narrow street? Leaving Pompeii behind, you climb the Appia Antica Road leading to Rome. This street, known as the King's Road leading to Rome, was one of the lifelines connecting the ancient cities. On this road, shaded by cypress trees on both sides, horse-drawn carriages once passed, and the massive stones on the path bore witness to the donkey caravans carrying goods from Naples to Rome. Now, the path is filled with cyclists, runners, and elderly couples out for their morning walk. You join them, feeling like a messenger from ancient times. You are approaching Rome. Can you hear the footsteps of the emperor? As you enter Rome, the bustling crowd of Via del Corso immediately opens the doors to another world. While shops update their annual displays, behind the store signs, a statue of an emperor leans against the mosaic remains of an ancient basilica, watching you. As a photographer, you capture this contrast. On one side, the modern world flowing by like a catwalk. On the other, stone walls that once bore the seal of the Senatus Populusque Romanus. While today's fashion shoots take place between those walls, tunnels reminiscent of ancient scribes' pen strokes still wait behind rusty doors. If you are a journalist, you circulate the news from Rome to the world in the city's forums. Torchlit processions are held. St. Peter's Square transforms into a stadium that evokes the atmosphere of ancient times. As you jot down notes on a paper napkin, you think about how the power of the Vatican is as global as its expensive mineral water bottles. You realize that the pinnacle of both power and faith is manifested in religion through the unanimous decision of a group, just as the emperor was actually elected by the votes of council members. The last generation of Rome's heroes are not ancient legionnaires. They are today's academics, archaeologists, urban planners, and human rights defenders. You are part of this line, a public servant who raises ancient theaters, restores basilica mosaics, keeps aqueducts alive, and works to bring the empire's sense of justice to modern courts. Your generation must kindle a light fueled by the shadows of Rome's history books, keeping the empire's footprints alive through a time corridor project. Preserving cultural heritage is also an important task. You will build historical TV series or film sets at the Cinecittà studios. One day, you will direct a new version of Ben-Hur. The next day, you will bring the ancient arenas of Gladiator back to life. After the sword-fighting show on those sets, you present a visual feast as real as an Olympic medal per person, while also reviving the cold iron craftsmanship of ancient armorers. Rome's entertainment world is like a continuation of the emperor's official processions, only enhanced with CGI effects and modern makeup materials. If you're a civil society activist, you'll develop a project to solve Rome's traffic problem, because those ancient roads leave today's traffic belts miles behind. As you replace the trash cans along the Appia Antica, you'll think, how meaningless is my obligation to this traffic flow compared to the courage of the legionnaires who paved those roads? This place is a maze as complex as the empire's underground water tunnels, as tightly planned as a land map, a mix of commercial vehicles, metro lines, and bike paths. In the world of sports, Roman eagles proudly adorn the emblems of football teams. As a sports reporter, you shout from the stadium stands, hearing a new version of an ancient legion march echoing through the air. SPQR. Today, gladiator matches held in modern arenas are still played with the spirit of those ancient shows. Only the opposing sides are not swords, but soccer balls. Victory is not for the emperor, but for the club president and the fans' enthusiasm. In the Liceo Classico schools of the education world, Latin and ancient Greek elective courses are still in high demand. As a high school student, the Roman Civilization project organized at the end of the year becomes a performance as prestigious as a choir concert. You gather students in the forum with the presentations you have prepared and ask, how do we control the wheel of fortune, the goddess of fate? This lesson is not just about recounting the past. It is a stage of wisdom that prepares students for the future. In today's democracy, the opening speeches of parliaments carry the same seriousness as the speeches of the imperial Senate. When you stand at the podium as a member of parliament defending a constitutional amendment, You are actually imitating the murmurs of the aristocrats in the imperial senate. When you receive your ballot, you feel a sense of responsibility akin to the excitement of a legionnaire receiving his rations. Because in Rome, the right to vote was one of the most important achievements ever, granting you freedom and the potential to ascend to the throne of an emperor. In the articles of engineers searching for the formula for Roman concrete in scientific literature, you pursue a formula that has been lost for centuries. That formula could be revived in the foundations of modern lighthouses, bridge piers, and earthquake-resistant buildings. As an engineer, with every experiment you conduct on the composition of this ancient concrete, you remember the light of the lighthouses the empire once built on overseas islands, because those Bosporus-filtered mortars form the engineering language of the empire's wisdom. Finally, members of Roman enthusiasts groups formed on social media platforms continue ancient philosophical debates. As a moderator, you share a poll titled, "Does everyone want strict law or arbitrary judgment?" The poll results reveal a clear picture, much like the legionnaires watching Augustus's council vote. Thus, the debates taking place in digital forms today become the virtual reflection of Rome's council debates. Thousands of such examples show that in the new world rising from the ashes of Rome, the most important element keeping the ancient spirit alive is your generation of heroes. Like the final pieces of a historical mosaic, your academic articles, engineering projects, works of art, city plans, legal designs, and peaceful protests all carry the blood that once flowed through Rome's veins into the present day. And whenever a person notices a small symbol inspired by ancient Rome, the shadow of the empire comes back to life. Because the true legacy lives not only in stone, but in the human spirit, in ideas, and in actions. In the streets of the ancient world's magnificent cities, science, healing, engineering, and astronomy had established their thrones. Looking back now, the traces of Rome's explorations form the foundations of today's technology. The limits of the human mind were defined by the first aqueducts, road systems, and hospital buildings constructed on those lands. In a sense, they answered the question, what are we as human beings, with concrete and marble mortar? In the early hours of the morning, you listen to the spring where water gathers at the base of the Aurelian aqueduct. The sound of that water carries a delicacy similar to the vibration produced by the pipes of today's water treatment plants. As an environmental engineer, you realize that the water released into the world by the massive arches of Roman engineers, water that irrigated farmlands and heated bathtubs, has inspired modern filtration methods. Because Roman water engineering was not just about transporting water to where it was needed, but also a masterful feat against gravity. Water flows through marble channels in a delicate stream, as elegant as the purified water filtering through today's pipes. Your next stop is the ancient road repair workshop along the Via Appia. As a transportation planner, you draw inspiration from the asphalt laid by Appius Claudius in 312 AD, a mixture of lime, brick fragments, and solid clay, which served as the precursor to horse-drawn vehicle tires and tire pressing technology. This mixture was strong enough to withstand the passage of heavy vehicles. Today, asphalt equipment performs similar tasks to concrete presses. However, Rome's crystallized road surface was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, much like the laying of brick mosaics. As you design highways stretching for miles, you adhere to the principles of strength, utility, and aesthetics, just as Vitruvius recommended. Roman hospitals, or valetudinaria, were the health centers of the ancient world. These hospitals formed the prototype for modern hospital complexes. If you are working on a water aqueduct restoration project near Playa del Carmen, you will first encounter the concept of hygiene, which regulates the use of water. This concept is as influential as the theories of the ancient physician Galen. Galen wrote about the importance of maintaining balance among the four fluids in the human body: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Much like the physical parameters that describe homeostasis today. As a biomedical engineer, you measure physiological parameters in laboratory animals, much like Galen did through his experimental animal dissections. These measurements are an evolution of the early concept of differential diagnosis, because ancient physicians recommended treatments by identifying subtle differences between complaints and findings, while modern doctors follow today's clinical algorithms. The ancient observatories that fascinated astronomy enthusiasts range from the horologium, sundial, on Palatine Hill, to the gnomon, on the north face of the Colosseum. As an astronomer or meteorologist, even when interpreting satellite data today, you think about the precise projection methods used by the Romans to divide the sky into time zones. Once, pentagrams were built to determine the time based on the angle of the sun's shadow. Now, GPS satellites provide your location to your phone. Nevertheless, Rome's sundial practices inspire every smartwatch user who asks, "What is the local time right now?" The precision of measuring time relies on the movement of a single centimeter of shadow cast by a marble gnomon built 2,000 years ago. Another engineering marvel is the opening in the Pantheon's dome and its concrete mixture. As an architect or materials engineer, you would research nanotechnology to produce materials as lightweight and durable as today's steel structures that resemble the central opening of the Pantheon dome. The volcanic ash, pozzolana, added to Roman concrete, which bears hammer marks, serves as a precursor to new additives you might incorporate into your concrete formulas. This material retains its durability even when exposed to seawater solutions. It is the ancestor of the corrosion-resistant components you use in today's underwater tunnel systems. Yet Rome's most brilliant scientific legacy may well be the codex, or manuscript book format. If you were an information technology expert, you would understand that ancient papyrus rolls were not limited to their potential storage capacity when designing today's digital data storage systems, but also served as a protocol for transporting and replicating written information. The process of transitioning from scrolls to parchment books and then to printed books is an evolution of today's ebook ecosystem. As a software engineer, when you create version control systems, you develop digital signature algorithms that use the same methods ancient scribes used to preserve and reproduce text. Which library, which page, which copy is preserved, who made historical interventions. All of this is recorded as digital stemma codicum. The ancestor of medical instruments was called a scalpellum, not a scalpel. As a surgical trainee, you take an interest in a miniature replica of an ancient metal bisturi alongside the microscope, because that instrument was designed to cut human skin with mechanical ergonomics and reduced risk of bacterial contamination. The masks and sterile gloves of modern surgical practice are the evolution of bronze gloves coated with gold dust extracted from the Pactolus River during that period. You still study those ancient surgical notes before every operation, reminding yourself that hygiene is as important as surgical skill. Rome's engineering genius is also evident in its tunnel systems. The Cloaca Maxima sewer system was the most advanced wastewater facility in the ancient world. As a water and sewer engineer, when planning today's underground rainwater drainage systems, you draw on the fundamental principles of the Cloaca Maxima, using those ancient formulas to structure your calculations of gravity, slope, and flow rate. Because the free flow of water can lead to serious problems similar to fault lines, even with a minor error in channel dimensions. In every calculation, you revisit the concept of gradient control, which was the fundamental principle for Roman engineers. Channel slope, flow rate, blockage probability. All these parameters have been transformed into electronic sensor codes carrying concepts from thousands of years ago. Ultimately, perhaps the most striking example of the Roman legacy of science and technology extending into the present day is the testudo, or turtle-shaped shield formation. If you were a defense technology researcher, you would draw inspiration from this formation to layer by layer reinforce the composite armor designs of modern armored vehicles. The shield formation distributes kinetic energy like a matrix structure. Today, the same encapsulation principle is used in computer simulations to determine standoff distances against firearms. In this section, we have seen that Rome's scientific and technological innovations laid the foundation not only for the ancient world, but also for the world of the future. Every new achievement you build upon these foundations will inevitably evoke the name of an ancient master, because every detail you see today in microchips, reinforced concrete bridges, nuclear power plants, and space rockets has its roots in an idea that first took root on Roman soil. And this root will continue to grow forever as humanity's shared heritage. The Roman Empire transformed the Mediterranean into an inland sea and connected the surrounding land masses by sea, creating one of the most extensive examples of trade, cultural interaction, and economic growth in the ancient world. Merchant ships set sail from ports with their white sails, bringing valuable goods from distant lands on the salty winds. Today, as a logistics planner, financial analyst, or global supply chain manager, you compare the routes in your modern databases with Rome's ancient sea routes and realize that the real power source is still a network that operates on a similar logic. As the first light of dawn breaks over Portus Romae, or Port of Rome, the silhouettes of the massive wharves that once controlled all trade routes in the eastern Mediterranean greet you. The docks where ships were lined up are almost like the ancestors of today's container terminals. The wooden crane systems of that era were primitive versions of today's port cranes. You want to learn how that wooden system worked to shorten unloading times and analyze turnaround time data, because modern cranes also adhere to the principles of speed and efficiency, albeit with different materials and motor power. Rome's land trade routes were as developed as its maritime networks. The roads stretching from the Via Appia to North Africa followed a logic parallel to the route optimization algorithms in your freight calculation programs. Those ancient roads were filled with miles of wheel tracks. You would compare the vibrations produced by horse-drawn carts before modern vehicles as durable as the latest truck tires to the pavement fatigue experienced on asphalt, designed to withstand centuries of limestone without damage. Along the route, rows of inns, kitchens, and blacksmith workshops formed a community similar to the modern ecosystem of rest areas, gas stations, and tire repair shops. One of the most important markets of ancient Rome was the grain warehouses established in Ostia Antica. As a commodity trader analyzing stock market data, you would compare the price fluctuations of grain stocks with the impact they had on bread prices for the Roman people centuries ago, using today's macroeconomic models. At that time, the government, under the secret of the Senatus Populusque Romanus, would release grain reserves when necessary to prevent sudden increases in flour prices. This intervention was as direct and powerful an instrument as today's central bank's monetary policy. When it came to money transfers, The first banking branches operated within temples, churches, and official customs offices. If you were a banking expert, you would study invoices and bilateral contract records from the 1st century AD, considered the precursors of SWIFT codes. Those documents were transported with a level of security similar to today's electronic transfers. Instead of signatures, seals were used, and instead of passwords, secret witness statements served as authentication. The lifeblood of trade was spices and silk transported by sea. The western terminus of the Silk Road from China was the ports of Rome. As a supply chain manager assessing silk supply security, you would examine the silk storage methods used by ancient merchants in a model parallel to today's closed cold storage chains. Silk rolls stored in closed warehouses were coated with natural resin to protect them from moisture. Today's climate-controlled storage rack systems are an evolution of these primitive yet effective barriers. One of Rome's most valuable exports was wine and olive oil. As a food engineer developing quality control procedures, you compare the pH and alcohol levels of wine fermented in open-air ceramic amphorae with today's microbial analysis techniques. Before the advent of automatic filling machines on assembly lines, samples taken from porcelain test tubes were still measured with technical skill and delicate manual force. Even in olive oil presses, the principles of pressure and liquid separation operate on the same basic principles as today's hydraulic presses. The trade network in Rome accelerated not only economic growth, but also cultural dissemination. Textile patterns transported from Tunisia to Egypt and from Galicia to Anatolia exhibited a spread similar to that of global restaurant chains today, adding diverse spice notes to world cuisines. As a marketing professional, when analyzing the impact of these patterns and spices on brand recognition, you might recall the experiential marketing events of ancient merchants, the annual market festivals held at the Forum, which inspired modern trade fairs in every way. One of Rome's largest economic mechanisms was its taxation system. As a tax law expert, you would compare the sales taxes known as centesima rerum venalium to today's VAT and income tax rates. The public treasury used the collected taxes to finance the army's salaries, road maintenance, and the construction of public buildings. Those tax codes, not yet fully written legislation, but the historical precursors of modern tax laws, were like the first prototypes of automation software that would later simplify your workload. When discussing just-in-time logistics in the modern world, you would first examine Rome's supply chains. The supplies and food needed for the army's tent life were delivered through planned expeditions, offering a delivery flow similar to your own in a historical calendar. A general or logistics officer would have paid close attention to expedition dates adjusted according to the positions of the stars, rather than today's Gantt charts. Finally, perhaps the most brilliant technological innovation of the Roman economy was the frumentari, a secret state courier service. As a cybersecurity expert, you might recall the storage methods used by these agents operating in the dark tunnels of their time, as you create VPN tunnels and encrypted emails to transport information in the digital realm. When it comes to secret messages, personal codes, and physical documents, these are the first traces of what we now call end-to-end encryption in data protection. As this lengthy narrative has shown, Rome's economic and trade networks form the backbone of the modern global economy. Whether you are a ship captain, a logistics planner, or a financial strategist, the principles inherited from Rome find new life in today's cloud-based systems and dashboards analyzing smart container reports. Because no matter how many centuries ago the empire fell, the truth that trade, markets, and cultures have always flowed through a network remains unchanged. And the first nodes of that network were laid in the stone harbors and muddy wheel tracks of Rome's caravan routes. Thousands of years ago, Rome, which slept to the sound of the Mediterranean waves, shaped the course of history, not only through its wars and imperial conquests, but also through the concepts it introduced to the world of thought. Now you are on a journey to discover the roots of the clusters of ideas that have deeply influenced humanity's collective conscience, following the currents of thought that rose from centuries ago. As a political scientist, a lawyer, or a philosophy student, you are analyzing the Roman idea that continues to resonate in parliamentary chambers, international courts, and university campuses. The first stop is the founding myth of the Roman Republic, the overthrow of Brutus and Tarquinius Superbus. When you read this story alongside the founding documents of the European Union, you see how an ancient revolution gave birth to the idea of the will of the people. Brutus, carrying the symbolic head of the tyrannical king at the gates of the Senate, was a ritual strikingly similar to the symbolic actions of protesters today, emptying the palace of a dictator. This first proclamation of freedom introduced the concept of res publica to the world, the idea that things are common. As you write the rules of the assembly, you will remember that the decision-making process was not based on the narrow group of 40 aristocrats that made up the Roman Senate, but on thousands of family councils that shaped the votes representing the people over generations. In Rome, the inscription Senatus Populusque Romanus, SPQR, was hung on the walls of every government office, shining like a catalyst to balance power and protect the law. As a constitutional law candidate, you will translate SPQR into contemporary constitutional texts as the rule of the people and the Senate. Before the terms citizens and parliament gained popularity, this dual system of governance existed. You would incorporate the distinction between potestas and auctoritas that Rome developed when it transitioned from a monarchy to a republic into the role and authority definitions you would add to the legislation. Potestas is the legal power of an elected official. Auctoritas, on the other hand, demonstrates their credibility in the eyes of society and the circle of trust that expects authority from them. In the next step, you will encounter the ideas that Stoic philosophers, such as Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, brought to the streets and palaces of the city. In Roman philosophy, virtue was not merely a personal attribute, it was the framework of honor, justice, and responsibility upon which society was based. As an ethics professor, you demonstrate the relevance of Stoic thought when designing today's leadership seminars. The virtues of controlling emotions, resilience in the face of adversity, and contributing to social life extend from CEO training to public servant orientation programs. Meditation and self-observation exercises draw inspiration from Marcus Aurelius's advice to look within yourself. You build a bridge to this today with mindfulness classes. The distinction between ius civile and ius gentium, considered the foundation of law, is one of the most memorable concepts that Rome passed on to the modern legal system. Ius civile is civil law applicable only to Roman citizens. Ius gentium is a set of universal rights applicable to all humanity, i.e., foreigners. As an expert in international law, you explain how we adopt the principles of ius gentium in international treaties, the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that all human beings are born free, carries on the legacy of ius gentium. The authority of the Praetor Peregrinus, Rome's first putative supranational court, to hear cases involving foreigners is fully consistent with the protocols of international arbitration institutions. While Roman jurists once defined and regulated the relationship between citizens and non-citizens in this way, today, You protect the same idea under the umbrella of the United Nations with universal principles such as the right to life, the right to a fair trial, and the right not to be subjected to forced labor. If you were a political advisor, you would examine the Roman practice of using the office of dictator as a temporary, extraordinary power. During the Republic, in critical moments, the consuls would appoint a dictator for a period of 6 months, allowing him to manage the crisis swiftly through his unlimited decrees. Afterward, the separation of powers would be restored. This method gave a similar format to what you today call the emergency governor in disaster management laws or national crisis centers. The first lessons on how to implement emergency measures in a controlled and legal framework were found in the Senate's decision lists. The heart of Roman education consisted of 3 stages: ludus, grammar school, and philosophical school. As an education reformer, you would explain that today's elementary, middle, and high school systems are derived from these 3 stages. In the ludus, the alphabet was studied on wooden tablets. In the grammatica, Greek and Latin grammar was memorized. And in the final stage, students were introduced to philosophy, rhetoric, and the art of declamation. You would suggest to the current curriculum preparation team that rhetoric be reintegrated into the curriculum, and while teaching them the speaking techniques of ancient Roman orators, you would give examples such as, "Even today, leaders influence the people with the art of rhetoric in power struggles." Thus, the saying, "Speech is silver, silence is golden," becomes a principle that shines anew in your educational policies. Gaius, one of Rome's most famous jurists, wrote a textbook called Institutiones, which paved the way for contemporary legal theorists. As a legal scholar, you share passages from his work in your lecture notes under the roof of the madrasa. The codification of law is not very different from the first articles of today's constitutions. The modern constitutional provisions stating that everyone is equal before the law echo Gaius's fundamental principles on citizens' rights. According to him, law should be based on the power of reason, not violence. You, too, emphasize the balance between reason and evidence in the sections on defense and prosecution. The concept of public service, which occupies an important place in Roman philosophy, is part of the same questioning as your definition of public benefit. During the dictatorship of Marcus Fulvius Nobilior, there was debate over how to collect the taxes needed to clean the interrogation buildings and how to ensure the welfare of the people. As a mayoral candidate, you ask similar questions in today's social policy projects. How should the poor be supported, infrastructure repaired, and education investments distributed equitably? All of these are updated versions of issues that were addressed 2,000 years ago in the Roman town squares. The ancient Roman system of crime and punishment shook the foundations of modern court systems. As a criminal lawyer, you compare your impressions from visits to the Carcer Mamertinus, where criminals were isolated from society, with today's prison rehabilitation programs. The handicraft courses offered to prisoners there shed light on today's vocational training workshops. The first efforts to reintegrate people into society are the ancient roots of your criminal social service models. Finally, Rome's greatest legacy is perhaps the concept of civic virtue. As a social researcher, you keep these virtues alive in volunteer donation projects, solidarity groups, and collective consumption initiatives. Because a Roman citizen was not merely a taxpayer or a soldier, they were individuals who contributed to the order of the city, extended a helping hand to their neighbors, and prioritized the public good over their own interests. When you talk about volunteering and social capital today, you draw on this ancient understanding of humanity. Such a deep and multi-layered intellectual heritage did not disappear with the fall of Rome. On the contrary, it evolved over time, spread to different parts of the world, and shaped the fabric of today's politics, philosophy, and law. As you close this chapter, you realize that Rome's ideas are perhaps the most enduring structures in the history of humanity. While stone buildings may crumble, the idea of order that humans have built in their minds is far more resilient. And you are one of the followers of the generation that is rebuilding that order in today's world, challenging the test of time.